Welcome back to a universe of mystery. Today, we'll dive into the story of James McGrogan, a man who went missing in Vail, Colorado. On March 14, 2014, James McGrogan, a 39-year-old emergency room doctor, disappeared while visiting Vail, a small town at the base of Vail Mountain in the center of a large ski resort in Colorado's White River National Forest. McGrogan had been hiking with a group of friends when his friends decided to stop for a break. James didn't want to stop, so he decided to keep going alone, saying he'd meet up with his friends later in the day. Despite an extensive search and rescue operation, his body was not found until April 3, 2014, near Booth Falls in the Vail area. It is believed that he likely died from injuries sustained in a fall while hiking, but the exact circumstances surrounding his death remain unknown. The tragic incident left his family and friends wondering whether it was just misadventure, bad luck, or something else. It's important to note McGrogan was an experienced outdoorsman who loved hiking and exploring the mountains. On the morning of March 14, 2014, at about 8:30 a.m., Jim and 3 hiking companions left on a 9-mile hike to the Eastman Hut and beyond to Camp Hale. The camp is a collection of huts deep in the mountains to serve as temporary shelters for hikers or campers. This site was originally built in the 1940s as the home of the 10th Mountain Division and a mountain warfare training area. At the time, there was a lot of snow in the area, several feet deep in some places. There are 2 main routes from the Vail area to the Eastman Hut, one via Spraddle Creek and a more westerly route via Red Sandstone Creek. Both of these trails were used heavily and were well marked with compacted snow. The hike itself was a 9-mile trail through steep and treacherous wooded terrain. The hut is not considered easy to reach. Although this was a challenging hike, McGrogan and company were experienced with the outdoors and well prepared. McGrogan himself carried with him a cell phone, basic medical supplies, a sleeping bag, an avalanche beacon, a GPS, warm clothing, and plenty of food and water. About 10 a.m., with the hikers still about 5 miles from the hut, the group stopped to rest. According to his companions, Jim decided to hike on ahead of the party, and they expected to catch up with him along the way. After Jim left the others behind to hike alone, he vanished. With the rest of the group reaching the Eastman Hut, it was late afternoon on March 14th. There was no sign at all of McGrogan. He was never seen alive again. By 5:30 p.m., the hikers had notified the Vail Department of Public Safety and subsequently the Eagle Valley Sheriff's Department. A rescue operation was started over an 18-square-mile area. McGrogan was well equipped, so authorities were not too concerned. He had food, water, and warm clothing, all the essentials needed to survive. He was also carrying a split snowboard, a snowboard that divides lengthwise, plus skins and other equipment from Confluence Kayaks in Denver, and was wearing the boots that went with the board. McGrogan's cell phone pinged once the day he was missing, but after that it went dead. Over the next 3 days, teams of searcher on foot, snowmobile, and 3 helicopters from the National Guard high-altitude aviation training site based near Gypsum, Colorado, searched the area, but by Tuesday, March 18th, bad weather forced the search to be suspended. Crews had spent a combined 1,000 hours searching for McGrogan. A 5-day search failed to find any sign of him despite snow in the area, which would have indicated if someone was hiking or skiing off the trail. 20 days later, McGrogan's body was found by a group of backcountry skiers about 4.5 miles from the trail on April 3, 2014, near the Booth Falls area. The reporting party told authorities that he and 2 others were skiing the Booth Falls area when they located the dead body in an ice fall below Booth Falls. He was found wearing his helmet, no coat, no gloves, and very strangely with no boots. In his backpack, his cell phone was discovered, and in this area there appeared to be active cellular reception. Jim's snowboard was also found nearby, but his boots were never located. On April 7, 2014, Eagle County Coroner Kara Bettis said that James McGrogan died of multiple injuries, including head trauma and to the left side of his chest. He also had a broken femur, and his death was ruled an accident. What happened to Dr. Jim McGrogan? He hiked 12 to 14 miles across the backcountry in deep snow, and the snow was up to 8 feet in some places, and apparently lost his boots. Perhaps he succumbed to hypothermia and began to paradoxically undress. Why didn't he use his cell phone or GPS? Both were fully functional. Why did he become separated from his hiking group and decide to leave on his own? A very mysterious case all around from the mountain of Vail. The story of Jim McGrogan is a tragic reminder of the risks and dangers that come with exploring the great outdoors. As an experienced hiker and snowboarder, McGrogan knew the importance of preparation and caution. Even the most experienced outdoorsman can fall victim to unexpected accidents and circumstances. While it's impossible to eliminate all risks when engaging in outdoor activities, there are several lessons that can be learned from McGrogan's story. First and foremost, it's crucial to be properly prepared and equipped for any outdoor adventure, whether it's hiking, snowboarding, or any other activity. This means carrying appropriate gear, checking weather conditions, and informing others of your plans and expected timeline. In addition, it's important to always stay aware of your surroundings, follow marked trails and boundaries, be mindful of your physical limitations. Finally, in case of an emergency, it is important to have a plan and know how to signal for help. Through the tragedy of McGrogan's death, his family and friends have dedicated themselves to promoting outdoor safety and preparedness, as well as honoring his memory through acts of kindness and service. By learning from his story and taking steps to stay safe in the great outdoors, we can honor his legacy and prevent future tragedies. There have been numerous strange and inexplicable disappearances and deaths in the remote wilderness areas around the world. These places are often treacherous and unforgiving, making them difficult for humans to navigate. Despite the inherent dangers of venturing into these wilds, there are cases where strange clues and eerie circumstances seem to be present. One of these unusual cases occurred in Crater Lake National Park in Oregon. Crater Lake National Park is located in Klamath County and is part of the majestic Cascade Range of southwest Oregon. The area is characterized by sprawling forests, fields of wildflowers, tranquil meadows, and towering cliffs and peaks. The air at Crater Lake is incredibly clean and clear, making it an incredibly beautiful location. The centerpiece of the park is Crater Lake, a strikingly beautiful body of water that is a deep shade of azure blue. Crater Lake covers an area of 21 square miles and has a maximum depth of 1,949 feet, making it the deepest lake in the United States and the third deepest lake in the world based on average depth. It is a caldera lake that was formed by Mount Mazama, a 12,000-foot tall volcano that erupted and collapsed approximately 7,700 years ago, forming the lake. Despite its beauty, the lake has been the scene of many unexplained and strange disappearances. A man vanished in the wilderness of Crater Lake National Park, leaving behind only strange clues and a bizarre set of remains that defy explanation. The circumstances surrounding his disappearance and subsequent discovery has led many to believe that there is something otherworldly or inexplicable at work in this remote, beautiful wilderness area. In 1975, Charles McCullough, a 19-year-old aspiring photographer, was drawn to the majestic Crater Lake National Park, which was covered in snow at the time. McCullough left his home in Virginia in 1974 to embark on a cross-country photography expedition, traveling by bus and stopping at places along the way to go hiking, have adventures, and take pictures for a photographic travel journal. He arrived in Eugene, Oregon in January 1975, where he stayed with a friend for a few weeks. During this time, he planned to take a 2-day trip to the lake to do some winter photography work. He packed up his equipment and headed out on his own. Despite the harsh winter conditions, McCullough was well prepared for his journey, and with a camera in his hand, he set out into the wilderness. It was a normal thing for the intrepid adventurer and photographer to do, so his friend thought nothing of it when Charles said he'd be back in a few days. However, when 2 days came and went with no sign of Charles, his friend assumed that he had decided to extend his trip, but when another day passed with no sign of him, authorities were notified. Authorities found witnesses who had seen the man in the Diamond Lake area, which is about 45 minutes by car from Crater Lake. It is believed that he had continued his trip from there and had arrived safely at the lake. However, other witnesses had claimed that Charles had headed out hiking along the North Road, which was odd since there had been about 5 foot of snow along that route at the time. It was thought that he might have changed trails after encountering the snow, but no one knew for sure, and there was no sign of him or his campsite in the area. Despite the exhaustive efforts from authorities and the tireless work of Charles's father, who flew out to aid in the search effort and camped out on the shore of the lake for the entire summer, not a single trace of the missing man was turned up at this time. The search, which grew to involve the FBI, was hampered by immersed drifts of snow, some of which were over 12 feet deep. Even after the snow melted, it seemed that if the forest had just swallowed Charles up, leaving no clues behind. Despite the extensive search efforts, no trace of Charles or his campsite was found. The lack of evidence sparked speculation of his disappearance, ranging from the possibility of him changing his plans and leaving the park on his own to being a victim of foul play. Charles's friends and family expected foul play, and the involvement of the FBI seemed to confirm their suspicions. It was highly unusual for the FBI to come involved in a missing persons case without the suspicion of foul play. The FBI's involvement was so peculiar that one of Charles's friends involved in the search wrote to then Senator William L. Squat to inquire about it. The lack of any evidence caused speculation that Charles may have run off to start a new life somewhere. However, family and friends insisted that he would never have done this. Law enforcement seemed to embrace the idea that he had simply gotten lost and died out in the wilderness. Another theory was that he had been kidnapped or even murdered. Charles's friends and family suspected that he had been the victim of some sort of foul play, which would explain the FBI's involvement, although they made no public statement to this effect. Authorities shied away from the idea of foul play because there was no evidence to support it. Their main theories were that he had run off or had suffered some sort of misadventure out in the wilderness. In the meantime, there was no sign of Charles, no new leads, and it was as if he had just vanished off the face of the earth. It wasn't until the next year, in October 1976, that a pair of hikers found a battered, torn-up backpack down in a remote canyon located 12 miles from where Charles had been supposedly camped out. The hikers brought the backpack to a ranger station, and within a side pocket they found a set of keys belonging to a Volkswagen, which was the type of car Charles had owned. Sensing a break in the cold case had been found, rangers ran a comparison with a photocopy of Charles' actual car key and found it was a perfect match. A patrol was immediately sent out on horseback to the area where the backpack had been found, near a place called Briery Creek. It was not long before human remains were found near the creek, and although it seemed like the final piece of the puzzle, things would only get stranger from here. Upon a log in the vicinity, a pair of jeans was discovered by a search party. Surprisingly, the jeans were in good condition despite being exposed to the elements for an extended period. However, there were no traces of a shirt, coat, or boots nearby. Inside the socks protruding from the jeans, broken toe bones were discovered. The jeans also contained nothing but a broken shin bone. Adding to the mystery, the belt on the jeans were unbuckled and the buttons were unfastened, indicating that the man may have removed them in the cold. Strangely, the rest of the body was nowhere to be found, and a ranger had described it if the man had just melted away. The search team had also found a crown of a skull and a few bone fragments located about 12 feet from the jeans. Despite a comprehensive search of the area, no additional remains of Charles were discovered, and all of his clothing, except for his jeans and socks, were missing. None of Charles's personal belongings, such as his wallet or camera, were found in the area either. The condition of Charles McCullers' remains were not only bizarre, but also raised many questions regarding how he ended up in that location. The area was remote and rugged, making it almost impossible to access, especially during the deep drifts of snow at the time of his disappearance. The fact that he was able to hike 12 miles away from his camp on foot, without shoes on, in such conditions, was baffling. Furthermore, it was puzzling as to why he would have gone to that location in the first place. The missing clothing only added to the mystery. Authorities attributed the missing clothing to a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing, where someone with hypothermia will feel hot and remove their clothes in an attempt to cool off in freezing conditions. However, this theory did not explain the condition of his remains in this completely bizarre state. Authorities ruled Charles McCullers' death as natural, stating that his body had been ravaged by wildlife after his death. However, his family did not accept this explanation. His brother, Steve, expressed his disbelief in the authorities' ruling, saying that the broken-off shin bone might tell a different story, one of foul play. Steve believed that Charles may have hitchhiked a ride with someone that stole his camera equipment, money, and may have shot him, and disposed of his body in the most remote part of Crater Lake, hoping that animals would destroy the evidence by spring. The mysterious disappearance and death of Charles McCuller remains unsolved to this day, leaving his friends and family with unanswered questions and lingering suspicions. Despite the odd circumstances of his remains being found miles away from his campsite and in a state of extreme decomposition, authorities closed the case, declaring it to be a death of exposure to the elements. The story highlights the need for thorough investigation and the need to investigate all possible explanations, including foul play. It also emphasizes the need for effective communication between law enforcement agencies and families of missing persons. Finally, it underscores the value of community involvement and the tireless efforts of volunteers and search and rescue operations. Charles McCullers' story serves as a cautionary tale for hikers and outdoor enthusiasts. It is also important to inform someone of your plans, including your intended route and expected time of return, and any alternate plans in case of an emergency. This information can be shared with family, friends, park rangers, or other authorities. Hikers should also be aware of the signs and symptoms of hypothermia, especially in the high-altitude terrain. If you've enjoyed this content from a universe of mystery, please subscribe, like, and share to the channel. It really helps me out, and it'll allow me to continue to bring mysterious stories to you. Welcome back to a universe of mystery. Today we'll be exploring the disappearance of Joe Elliott Blakesley and Amy Linkart. In September 2013 at Craters of the Moon National Monument in Idaho. The remains were eventually found between September and October of the same year. Joe Elliott Blakesley, age 63, was a physician who worked at a correctional institute in Ontario, Oregon, while Amy Linkart, age 69, was a retired school teacher from Lowell Scott Middle School in Meridian, Idaho. The two women met while doing missionary work back in the 1980s. The two friends embarked on a journey in September 2013 and headed for Craters of the Moon National Monument. Unfortunately, they never returned from their short hike. Now, I've been to Craters of the Moon. I was there in 2014. It is an absolute beautiful but treacherous landscape. It's old lava flows that have hardened to jagged, sharp rocks and caves. There's caves all over the place, and you would have to be absolutely out of your mind to leave the marked trail. There are jagged rocks that you can't even step on without the threat of falling through a cave. While we were there, we did hike a few trails, and we did explore a few caves. This national monument is located in central Idaho. It was established in 1924, and it's situated along US 20, concurrent with US 93 and 26, and it lies between the town of Arco and Cary with an average elevation of 5,900 feet. This volcanic region is one of the best preserved flood basalt areas in the United States. The region is composed of 3 major lava fields, spanning a total area of over 1,000 square miles. And you do not want to get lost out there because literally it looks like desolate wasteland as far as the eye can see. Joe and Amy were reported missing on September 23rd after Dr. Elliott Blakesley's colleagues alerted the authorities when she didn't show up for work. Due to a federal looming government shutdown, the official search did not begin until October 1st. However, 10 rangers did respond and started the search without the aid of federal money such as dogs, rescue teams, and helicopters. Joe and Amy were last seen at a nearby campground in Arco, approximately 18 miles from the park. Authorities discovered park receipts, which had shown the women visited the park on September 24th. Their vehicle was later found at the Tree Molds Trail parking lot. Their dogs, cell phones, purses, and other belongings were found in the truck. Now, it is important to note that at Craters of the Moon, dogs are not allowed on the trails in the park. They're allowed in the parking lot and certain common areas, but they don't allow them on the trails. The terrain is so sharp and jagged, it's just not safe for dogs to be there. And the surface of the rocks can reach up to 150 degrees in some cases. When the search was expanded, they discovered Amy's remains in a lava field north of the Tree Molds Trail. Amy was found on the rocks, laying face up, with no backpack, no jacket, no food, no water, none of the essentials needed to survive. Authorities believe that she had become disoriented because the direction she was walking was kind of facing towards a highway that you could see in the distance, and authorities believe she eventually just succumbed to exposure. But no foul play was suspected. Initially, the searchers thought they had found Joe, but after a confirmation of dental records, it was found that that was actually Amy's body, which isn't surprising given how much the two women do look alike. After an additional month of searching, authorities did recover Joe Elliott Blakely's remains about a mile from where Amy was found, and it was about 2.5 miles away from where their pickup was found. And this was an area that search helicopters had flown over, but it's believed that the way the terrain is set, and they just couldn't spot her from above. She blended in right with the rocks. And she was kind of found inside one of these caverns. So her body was obstructed from the air, and she also appeared to have succumbed to dehydration and exposure to the elements. Since Amy and Joe were not seen since they had checked into the park, there were no witnesses on the trail, so nobody's quite sure about how they got separated or why they separated, but authorities concluded that it could have been that one of them was hurt, so they decided to split up so the other one could go get help. And it's not surprising to me, because if you venture off that trail, it is very easy to hurt yourself or get stuck, get a leg stuck or twist an ankle. But the question still remains, why were they found so far away from their truck when all indications pointed to where this was supposed to be a short hike, leaving the dogs in the car, leaving their cell phones in the car? And it's just believed that they became disoriented. There were reports, I couldn't find consistent reporting on this, but there were reports that the weather had started to shift and a storm was moving in. So maybe it got foggy and they just lost their way. As mentioned earlier, maybe one of them got hurt and the other went to seek help and got lost and headed towards that highway, the only place she could see for help in the distance. But that distance is very unforgiving, and it's hard to judge just how far something is away in that terrain because everything looks the same. It's like seeing a ship on water that you think is right there, but once you start swimming towards it, you realize how far it is. So the conclusion by the authorities was just that they were found, that they got separated, possibly injured, and they had just succumbed to the harsh Idaho elements. What do you think happened to Amy and Joe? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this content, please subscribe, like, and share. It really helps the channel, and it really helps me to bring more videos like this. The first snowfall of the year is usually a beautiful and joyous celebration in the small ski town of Mammoth Lakes in California's Eastern Sierra. But the early October snow in 2013 was disheartening for the searchers of a missing Pennsylvania man. Hope was fading with the inevitable change in season, and those close to him were starting to understand the grave reality that he may never be found. From more than 2,500 miles away, his loved ones experienced a tug-of-war between despair and optimism, feeling helpless across the country as they went through the motions of their daily lives. 3 months earlier, in July, the 39-year-old high school math teacher dropped his car off at a Mammoth auto car shop for repairs. He was visiting the area for a summer climbing vacation when the car blew a head gasket. The friends Green was traveling with headed home, and Green planned to drive to Colorado to join other friends for more climbing as soon as his car was ready. "I may have to spend the rest of my life here in Mammoth," he texted to a friend as he got more and more frustrated with how long the repair was taking. He was anxious to get on with his trip. No one has heard from Green since he last talked to his parents on July 16, 2013. He did not tell anyone his plans for the following day. He never picked up his car. His campsite was left tidy, and his credit cards and phone have not been used since. Matthew had a habit of ripping out pages from a guidebook as to where he planned to hike, instead of taking the entire book with him. When he returned from a hike, he would replace the missing pages as a trophy of sorts. The only clue that was found was a few pages torn from a mountaineering guidebook, and this pointed toward the Minarets and Ritter Range in the Ansel Adams Wilderness. At the time, Mammoth Lakes was experiencing sunshine and above-average temperatures. On July 29, 2013, Matthew Green was reported missing, and his body has not been found in the years since. In 2013, more than 600,000 Americans were reported missing in the United States, according to the FBI and National Crime Information Center. At the end of the year, nearly 85,000 of those cases were still active. At the time he went missing, Matthew Green was the only unsolved missing person case in Mammoth Lakes, and in January 2014, Reed's family filed for a death certificate in Pennsylvania. But the case is still open with the Mammoth Lakes Police Department. Most people assume that Matt was a victim of some sort of climbing accident, a fall of some sort, said his friend John Greco, that met him in California. But all his friends agreed that he was experienced, skilled, and careful in the mountains. Born on September 8, 1973, to Robert and Patricia Green, Matthew is the second of 4 children. He grew up in rural Pennsylvania, developing a love for the outdoors from a young age. He was a Boy Scout and often went hunting and fishing with his dad. Growing up in the boondocks of Franklin Townships was a blessing. Green wrote in 1999 in a letter to his sister, Tiffany Minto, when he was in the Peace Corps. I came out of there with independence, a love of nature, and a determination to succeed in school, life, or whatever. When they were kids, Green would take Minto fishing and target shooting at the lake, where they'd stay until bugs feasted on their arms. They went hiking together often, even in the really cold winters common to the Northeast. The ice didn't slow him down one bit. I struggled to keep up, Minto said. Green loved to run, competing on the track team in high school and running the Boston Marathon a few times as an adult. As the student speaker for his high school graduation, Green urged his classmates to take chances. The time has come to fulfill our current goals and to set new ones to be conquered later. In our future travels and endeavors, no matter where they take us, we must not use our youthful imaginations. We must not be too scared to take risks, and most of all, we must live life to the fullest. Matthews said in his high school graduation speech. Green went on to study at Clemson University in South Carolina before transferring to and graduating from Penn State University. As a Peace Corps volunteer on a teaching assignment in Papua New Guinea from 1998 to 2001, he regularly wrote letters to her sister giving her advice on life, college, and relationships. Any associations you have in your life can be lumped into one of these 3 categories: people who push you forward, people who drag you down, and people who do neither, he wrote. He also wrote to friends, telling tales of his adventures, like walking 6 hours to fix a radio transceiver in a hiking tour, which was a 9-hour trek across dense brush and mountainous terrain, where he found himself crossing a roaring 100-foot waterfall, wading for shallow rivers, carefully walking, and descending countless valleys. In his letters, Green not only gave accounts of his work and explorations, but he also contemplated life and its greater meanings. He wrote, "It's a pitiful thing when people reach the point in their lives where passionate inclinations in their lives no longer win out over regular routines. I don't know why our minds always gravitate towards reason. It's a nuisance. At least for me. It takes a lot of mental effort to give in to his passions, but once I've devoted myself to them, I'm never plagued with regret." When he returned from the Peace Corps, Green got a job as a high school math teacher in Pennsylvania and would go on summer climbing trips to fulfill his needs for adventure. He often traveled out west solo for camping, hiking, and climbing, occasionally meeting up with friends along the way. In 2006, he road tripped through South Dakota, Wyoming, and on to Red Lodge, Montana. When his car broke down at the end of the trip, he tooled around town and hitchhiked to a trailhead. In his trip log he wrote, over the course of a few days, I put in an awesome 10-hour hike. The rock was surprisingly solid, yet some big pieces moved. I returned to find that rodents had torn into my engine plug wires, vacuum hoses, and mostly wire sheathing. I coasted into town and took my car into the shop. They should get to it tomorrow morning. The next day, he wrote, same as yesterday, no car yet. Hitched a ride out to the Bear Track and hiked up the Silver Plateau. It's awesome up there. Good mix of pines and open fields. More reading, more net searching, coming up with a plan. Yellowstone, climb Tiwanaut, Wind River Range, ring the bells, maybe the Great Sands Dunes, and Long's Peak, then home. Still waiting on that car. Green arrived in Mammoth Lake a few days before he met up with his friends John and Jill Greco on June 28, 2013. He set up camp at New Shady Rest Campground on the edge of town and paid for July 7th. John, Jill, and their 9-year-old son checked in at a hotel nearby. Over the next 10 days, Green and John climbed many of the region's classic routes, places like Crystal Crag, Clark's Canyon, and the Gong Show Crag. They also hiked a few of the Eastern Sierra's classic alpine routes. Green kept a handwritten log of his climbs, sometimes elaborate and other times brief. He often checked and reported conditions on websites. During this trip, he wrote on Summit Post, did the V-Notch on Saturday, July 6th. We easily crossed it via a snow bridge. We studied the route well for signs of rockfall before committing, and only had one baseball-sized rock rocket down during our ascent. Tons of rocks were falling the U-Notch. During Green's time in Mammoth, his Subaru was in and out of the auto repair shop. It would get fixed, then overheat, driving up a steep grade and go back to the mechanic. It was finally diagnosed with a blown head gasket, which would take additional time to repair. On July 7th, John and Jill were scheduled to leave Mammoth Lakes. John had a work meeting in Southern California the next day, and Matt planned to leave for Colorado to meet up with some other friends. That morning, the whole group hiked to Emerald Lake in the Mammoth Lakes Basin before Matt continued up the trail to the Mammoth Crest, and John and Jill headed down to their car to begin the drive. It was the last time any of Matt's friends would ever see him again. As we were walking down the trail, I say to my husband, he goes off like this, and he doesn't tell anybody. If something happens to him, nobody will know where to look, Jill said. Her husband said, yeah, and the bad thing about it is that his car won't be at the trailhead. Even though Green had planned to leave that day as well, his car was still in the shop. He was fine being stuck in Mammoth. It's not like he was in the middle of some remote backcountry area. There were shuttles to take you all over the place, and he thought it was only going to be a couple of days. Over the next 8 days, Green continued to climb classic Sierra peaks and routes, checking in with John and Jill by text message every few days. On July 8th, Green soloed Regal Huff Minaret, a 10,560-foot spire in the Ritter Range west of Mammoth Lakes. On July 9th, Green headed north to climb Dana Kowar, a popular 1,200-foot ice route on a 13,000-foot peak near Yosemite Park's entrance. Later, he sent John an update. The Regal Huff Minaret took less than 6.5 hours round trip, but was scary, and the Dana Kowar was easy but fun and had the best ice of the trip. July 10th was a rest day. On July 11th, Green took the shuttle to Red's Meadow Valley to hike and climb in the Minarets and Ritter Range again. On the ride to the trailhead, he spoke to a Devil's Post maintenance worker. They talked about climbing Mount Ritter, Banner Peak, Clyde Minaret, and the cross-country hikes between the Minaret Lakes. Matthew was not sure of his itinerary for the day when he got off the shuttle at the Devil's Post Pile trailhead, but he eventually climbed the 12,280-foot Clyde Minaret. the tallest of the Midderet's jagged peaks. From July 12th to the 15th, Green hiked the cross-country route on Mammoth Crest, and he climbed Unicorn Peak in Yosemite's high country. On July 16th, he went to the Mammoth Lakes Library to use the internet. He called his parents and the mechanic, then sent a few text messages and made a small purchase at Rite Aid. He paid the campground for the night and the next day. Since Jill and John left Mammoth, they continued texting back and forth with Green every few days. Jill updated him on details for a trip to France they were tentatively planning later that summer, and John received updates on the climbs Green had done. Jill grew concerned when Green stopped responding to texts. At first, she didn't think anything about it. Then she called him, and her husband sent him a text. Again, they didn't hear from him. On July 21st, after 3 unpaid nights, the host at the campground reported the abandoned campsite and suspicion of a missing person to the Mammoth Lakes Police Department. 2 officers responded to the call, visited the campground, and recorded the information on a police log. Campsite number 164 was left intact, but Green had not returned to it. His neatly folded laundry was stored inside the tent along with some gear. His food was in the bear box. MLPD Detective Doug Hordback said, "We can't really do a whole lot unless a missing person report is filed. We'll get a name and the information, we'll put it on the log, and that's as far as it goes at this point." So the campsite was broken down, Green's gear was put into storage, and new campers soon occupied the site. On July 26, Green's mom expressed concern that she hadn't heard from Matt. She'd been leaving messages that went unanswered. But Green often went on long hikes and backpacking trips and didn't return messages immediately. Sometimes it would take him days or weeks to readjust to society after a good trek. He enjoyed the solitude of the wilderness and was not into technology, so his sister Minto brushed off his mom's concerns. She said he probably couldn't charge his phone or was spending some time in the backcountry. They knew that Green could not use his car phone charger because his Subaru was still in the shop, so she thought maybe his phone was dead. Still, she knew that his lack of response was unusual, and she grew increasingly concerned when she didn't hear from him for 10 days. John called Tony, Green's friend, that he was planning to meet in Colorado to see if Green had arrived. Maybe he was spending time in the backcountry, Tony suggested. On July 29th, 7 days after Green's campsite was packed up and put into storage, Jill called the Norco Goodyear to inquire about his car. She was told it had been ready since July 18th. Green had not responded to a message saying the car was ready, and he had not picked it up. Jill then called the Mammoth Lakes Welcome Center and talked to a ranger. She asked for someone to check on his campsite, and the ranger insisted she file a missing persons report. 13 days after Green disappeared, he was officially reported missing. Green was no stranger to climbing mountains. His list of ascents logged on Summit Post read like the resume of an experienced mountaineer. His friends said he was skillful on ice, calculated in the outdoors, and did not take risks. More than 2 weeks after Green talked to his parents for the last time, Detective Hornback contacted Verizon for an emergency information request. Verizon concluded that Green's phone had been powered off for quite some time, and there was no way to track the current location. The last ping was registered to the cellular tower on Mammoth Mountain on July 16th. According to Detective Hordbeck, the ping created a cone-shaped triangle with towers in Fresno and June Lake, indicated that Green's phone was located within that region, which consists of mostly of the Ansel Adams wilderness. The Mammoth Lakes Police Department did not find any evidence of foul play, and the possibility of suicide was quickly ruled out. Green did not have any financial trouble. He was single and showed no signs of depression. When the Grecos last saw him in Mammoth, Jill said he was as normal and optimistic as he normally was. On July 31st, Detective Hornbeck notified Bill Green, no relation, at Mono County Sheriff's Search and Rescue. Typically, when a person is reported overdue in the mountains, SAR launches an investigation. They are quick to respond and have a healthy roster of volunteers that are experienced mountaineers, but Matthew Green did not tell anyone where he was going. And his car was still at the mechanics, so they didn't even have a trailhead to go from. Without a known location, SAR could not begin a search. Matthew Green could have gone anywhere. Most of his equipment was stored in his car, which was parked outside the Norco Goodwear while waiting for repair, meaning he had access to his personal belongings 24 hours a day. From an inventory of the equipment left in his car and tent, friends were able to deduce what he was carrying with him. He was probably wearing a blue outdoor ball cap, a black t-shirt over a long-sleeve green shirt, and mountaineering approach shoes. He had a large black and white mountain hardware backpack, an ice axe, black diamond crampons, and was either carrying or wearing boots. He did not have overnight gear. Since he had no vehicle, Green's only option to get to trailheads was to either walk, hitchhike, or public transport. With a number of local shuttle services, which Green had used in the week prior to his disappearance, he could have made it to a number of trailheads, from the Mammoth Lakes Basin to Yosemite Valley. From the guidebook found in his belongings, Chapter 12 was torn out, which included minarets and June Lake. With the shuttle to Red's Meadow, Green could have been at any one of 3 main trailheads in the valley that leads to a network of paths that access the trail ranges in the wilderness. The 231,533-acre wilderness area is located west of Mammoth Lakes and the Sierra Nevada crest in Madera County. It shares a border with Yosemite National Park to the north and the 581,000-acre John Muir Wilderness to the south. The region is popular for hiking, backpacking, and climbing. The mountain range is vast and rugged. Even though SAR could not launch a full-on search without a known destination, they sent teams to the Minaret region on training missions. They checked summit registers in the range, and a helicopter team did a flyover. Detective Hornbeck worked with the U.S. Forest Service to contact people with overnight wilderness permits for the region. If anyone spoke with Green on the trail or shuttle or gave him a ride, they have not come forward yet, or they do not know he is missing. Green's family hired an aerial tour company to fly over the region. They mounted a red digital camera to the wing of an old Piper airplane. The camera is capable of recording high-quality images at 30 frames per second while being zoomed in at 3x. They recorded 100 gigabytes of data that was later processed and examined, but showed no evidence of Green. Detective Hornbeck followed up on every single tip. Psychics from around the world called with information after looking into a crystal ball or having a dream. A retired police officer in Minden, Nevada, reported a sighting of a young man that fit the description of Green at a Nevada gas station. A woman said she had given Green and his dog a ride to Colorado, but Green did not have a dog. Glasses were found near the Inyo Crater's trailhead less than 10 miles from Green's campsite, but the prescription did not match. The police talked with campers in the lakes adjacent to Green's. They interviewed the employees at the auto shop. No one had any concrete information. What frustrated them the most was that he was so experienced, but he didn't tell anyone where he was going. There's nothing wrong with sending a text and saying, "Hey, I'm going to go climb in the minarets today. That would solve a lot of problems. Detective Hornbeck said. Green's sister began compiling facts and information, creating a Find Matthew Green Facebook page. She did interviews with reporters. Friends started forum on climbing websites seeking information. Conversations were started and theories were tossed around. Where would Matthew Green have gone? The MLPD press release was published in the local papers. Media outlets in Pennsylvania picked up the story, and a short news brief made it Los Angeles Times. What makes the minaret so appealing to climbers is also what makes the Rubbet Peak so dangerous for climbing. The Ritter Range is located within the Sierra Nevada, just west of the crest. The jagged landscape of the minarets and sharp summits of Mount Ritter and Banner Peak can be seen from all over Mammoth Lakes. The range stands tall and mighty, separating the Sierra from the rounder mountains in the coastal range. Unlike the granite that makes up much of the Sierra, the Ritter Range is metavolcanic rock, which was formed in several volcanic supereruptions, according to Alan Glassner, professor of geology at the University of North Carolina and author of a book about the geology in and around Yosemite. These eruptions produce hot volcanic rock deposits that flow much like an avalanche. Metavolcanic rocks are generally kind of sketchy for climbing because they flake apart easily and are not nearly as strong as granite. That's why they form spiky landform like the minarets instead of big smooth cliffs like Half Dome. It's been years since Matthew Green disappeared from Mammoth Lakes, and still no trace of him has surfaced. In August 2014, his campground neighbors returned to the area and saw a missing persons sign. They called the police department and met with Detective Hornbeck and Bill Green from Search and Rescue. They said they invited Matthew to go for a hike with them, but he declined. He did not say, or they could not remember where he was going. Since Green was carrying an ice axe and crampons, Mount Ritter is a logical guess for his destination on July 17, 2013. The Southeast Glacier is the most prominent snow route in the range. The trailhead is accessible from public transportation. Was in the chapter of the guidebook that he was carrying. For even the fittest of mountaineers, climbing Mount Ritter in one day is a huge feat, and the hike is 7 miles one way. And then it is another 4,000 vertical feet of off-trail hiking and climbing to reach the summit. At the time of Matt's disappearance, I had a pretty strong suspicion that he had gone to Mount Ritter, but after reflecting on it and revisiting the area last summer, I am not so sure, said John Greco. I don't think the climb itself would be particularly appealing to Matt. It seems like somewhat of a slog with limited technical challenges. Green did not have any unknown pre-existing medical conditions, and an animal attack is doubtful, as no evidence were ever found. There has never been a human death by mountain lion or black bear in the region, and grizzly bears haven't been there since the 1920s. It seems likely that Matthew Green had a fatal climbing accident. Maybe he would have set out to climb the region's tallest and most prolific mountain on his last day in the area, but there is no hard evidence. If Matthew Green hitchhiked like he had been known to do in the past, he could be anywhere. And since he had climbed in the minarets a few days prior to his disappearance, it is possible that the chapter of the guidebook was still in his pack. But there was enough suspicion that multiple search parties focused on the minarets and the Ritter Range. Green's close friend and climbing partners went to Mammoth Lakes to search in August 2013, and a number of local climbers and mountaineers have spearheaded their own small search parties in search of Matthew. Dean Rosnaw, a former SAR officer and member, has spent nearly 30 days searching for Green. In August 2013, Rosnaw focused on the minarets. But late that summer, he began to gravitate toward Ritter and Banner. In a search area so vast, what we are looking for is so small. One will literally have to step on the evidence to find it, Rosnoff said. A lot of gear has been hauled out of the wilderness areas that surround Mammoth Lakes, but none of it has been identified as Matthew Green's. The unknown and lack of resolution is part of a grieving process unlike any other. When the snow started to fall in 2013, the search came to a halt and the missing person posters were taken down for the season. The family petitioned for and received a death certificate in Pennsylvania so they could settle his affairs. There has been no memorial service. The hardest part is the not knowing, said his friend Tom Davidoff. If he had let someone know where he was going, we'd have a completely different situation. But you can't get mad at him. We've all done it. Green's closest friends and climbing partners each say they don't climb as much as they used to, and most of them can't really explain why, other than the disappearance of Matthew. There is a lingering feeling of disappearance and sorrow that just dampens their enthusiasm. Greco hasn't done any mountain climbing since Matt disappeared, with the exception of the searches that they did for him. He can attribute it to a lack of partners, work, and family responsibilities getting in the way, but in truth, I just haven't been motivated to make it happen, he said. In 2014, Green's father, Robert, spent the summer in Mammoth Lakes. At 69 years old, he was slightly overweight and out of shape, but he began training so he was conditioned to hike in the High Sierra. He wanted to spend the summer in the mountains where his son is presumed dead, and he hiked nearly 700 miles that summer. He explored the trails that Matt had enjoyed. He searched with Rosnoff, and he climbed for the first time. Greco led Robert up Crystal Crag so he could stand on a summit that Matt had also stood on in the year prior. Green's mother wanted him to get a taste of the kind of climbing Matt loved to do most, so he could hopefully understand the appeal and attraction. She just kept thinking about how Matt would have enjoyed watching his dad climb, something I'm sure he never would have considered doing before Matt's disappearance. Green's mother, Patricia, visited Mammoth Lakes that summer for the first and only time for 1 week with her daughter. Not a hiker, Patricia spent most of the time in town, while Minto hit the trails with her father. She felt completely at peace and in awe of the beauty. But turning home just felt like she was turning her back on Matt and the possibility of finding him. She wished she could move on, but it's just impossible. To this day, no trace of Matthew Green has ever been found. What do you think happened to Matthew Green in the mountains? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this content, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. It really helps me provide this content to you and tell the stories of the missing. Welcome back to a universe of mystery. Today we're going to delve into the story of Aaron Hedges, a 38-year-old hunter that went missing outside of the Crazy Mountains in Montana. Now, Aaron grew up in this area of the country, out west. He was an avid hunter. He hunted this area his entire life. So much so that from years prior, he had caches hidden all over the mountains. That way, if he ever needed any supplies on a future hunting trip, he could go and uncover one of the caches and have what he needed so he didn't have to end his trip early. Aaron Hedges was last seen on September 5th, 2014. Him and two of his hunting friends decided to go on a hunting trip to hunt elk right outside the Crazy Mountains. The Crazy Mountains get their name, or the Crazies for short, from a lore story about a woman whose entire family was killed by Indians, and she went after them with one of their own tomahawk axes and ran into the mountains, never to be seen again. So Aaron and his two buddies head up into the mountains, and it's bow hunting season at the time, so they all have to have bows with them, although they did have some guns for their own protection. Aaron and his two buddies had a plan. They were going to hike to a place called Campfire Lake. Now you can't get close to this lake by vehicle. You can get to like the base of the crazy mountains by vehicle, but in order to get to this Campfire Lake where they were going to set up a base camp and stay for around 7 days hunting elk, it's a good ways hike. So what they did was, instead of having to carry all their gear on their person, they had 2 horses and a mule to carry their gear for them. Now a couple miles into this hike, something spooked the animals. The horses went crazy, the mule went crazy, and the mule actually got away and ran off, spilling most of Aaron's gear all over the place. So now they got to stop, try and collect and salvage what kind of gear that they have, but Aaron was missing gear. But they figured this be no big deal because there were caches that they had hidden all over the place. So their plan was to just continue on with the hike to Campfire Lake, get a base camp set up, and the other guys had extra supplies, so supplies weren't going to be a big deal right off the bat, and they would be able to eventually uncover one of these caches and have extra supplies. So Aaron and his buddies get to Campfire Lake, and the weather is beautiful. All the reports say it was about 50 degrees, sunny. You couldn't just ask for any better hiking or hunting weather. So they get to the base camp, they get the base camp set up, and they stay there for 2 days. Aaron doesn't have a sleeping bag, so he gets tired of having to sleep next to the fire and getting cold at night. So he decides he's going to go find one of his caches. Around 10 a.m. the next morning, Aaron leaves his buddy and says he's going to hike up to a place called Sunlight Lake to retrieve one of his caches that he had up there. Now, he had a cell phone, a gun, and they had walkie-talkies. On the way to Sunlight Lake, there's a fork in the trail, and the trail is really well marked, really worn. It's really hard to get lost on this trail. So Aaron goes off to try and find one of these caches, and that was at 10 in the morning. So around 5 p.m., his buddies still hadn't heard from him, hadn't seen him, and they started to wonder where he was and if he was okay. And they did have these walkie-talkies that are hooked through a GPS system. So when you walkie somebody, and they respond, it sends the actual coordinates of where the person is responding from to the other walkie-talkie and vice versa. So it's really kind of hard to get lost this way because they know exactly where each other are. However, what Aaron was saying, his buddies found really hard to understand. They described it as like garble, talking nonsense. They couldn't really understand what he was saying, but they did hear him, and they knew he was still alive, and they had his coordinates. But what gets really weird is the coordinates that they were sent on the walkie-talkie showed that he was going the wrong direction. He had taken the wrong fork in the road, and somebody with Aaron's outdoor experience, that seemed like a real trivial mistake for an experienced outdoorsman to make. So they became concerned. So they waited another few hours, and later that night, before they were getting ready to go to bed, they tried to radio Aaron again. However, this time there was no response on the radio. So now his buddies wake up the next day, still no sign of Aaron, and now they can tell the weather is starting to shift. There's a bad snowstorm about to move in, but they decide, let's give him another day in case he comes wandering in and shows up with his gear, and then they could all leave together. So they wait around another day, and now the snowstorm starts to hit, and basically Aaron's buddies were forced to pack up and leave because they just weren't prepared for that kind of weather, and they weren't able to survive properly out there on their own in a huge hellacious snowstorm. His buddies get off the mountain, and over the next 12 to 24 hours, almost 2 feet of snow gets dumped on this mountain. So now they really begin to worry, and they go and they contact the authorities to get started a search and rescue mission. So now the way these mountains are set up, 2 counties were actually involved in the search and rescue. And they included search and rescue teams, helicopters, and scent dogs to try and pick up a scent or locate his tracks. The search team searched for 2 days. And while one of the teams is coming back from the search area, a place that had already been searched, they come across a campfire. And at this campfire location, they found his camelback and his boots, which were neatly stacked right next to the campfire, and also a pack of cigarettes that were in the campfire that was Aaron's brand. And another weird thing that they found was in the campfire, his backpack straps, not his backpack itself, but the straps that you strap the backpack around your front side with, were laying about halfway in the campfire, and they were about halfway burnt. And perhaps the weirdest thing of all, because it had been snowing, there were no tracks to or from this location where the campfire was. No footprints, no trail, no anything. It was as if somebody had just picked Aaron up out of the wilderness and he just vanished. The search teams included 60 individual searchers, 2 helicopters with thermal imaging, and they brought in 20 different canine search and rescue teams to try and pick up a scent or trail or anything about Aaron, and they couldn't find anything. Now, let's fast forward 9 months later. Winter's over, all the snowstorms have passed, and there was a rancher, and the way the crazy mountains are set up is it's mostly surrounded by private property, private ranches, farms, things like that. So 9 months later, a rancher is out just inspecting his farm. He's about a mile away from his ranch, checking on some fences, where he sees that a hunter, had left his backpack. So he wanders over, just thinking a hunter had just left it there, and he picks it up and looks inside of it. He found Aaron's ID, a .44 caliber pistol, some nutrition bars, water, and other basic supplies. And the way he found the backpack was weird, because it was like it was gently placed next to the tree, like somebody had gone out of their way and took care in actually placing this backpack. It hadn't looked like it had been there all winter through the elements. It looked brand new, sitting next to a tree. Close to where they found the backpack, they also find a thermostat, which was Aaron's, and an energy drink that was about half drank, sitting next to the thermostat on a stump. Now this was really weird, because the location they found this thermostat in, you could physically see down the mountain, a ranch, a creek, everything you needed to get help. If he was truly lost in the wilderness, looking and needing help, help was right there, about a mile away. He could see it with his own eyes. Why would he choose to sit there and stare at it from a mile-long distance and sip on an energy drink? So after finding his backpack, these ranchers, they find no trace of Aaron himself, just some of his possessions, his ID, his pistol. Now fast forward 23 months later, almost 2 years later, that same group of ranchers, they were up doing more maintenance on their ranches. They were on horseback going through the trails. And as they're riding, one of them looks over and he spots a skull sitting underneath a tree. And now a weird thing about this was the skull was in almost perfect condition. There was no obvious signs of trauma. It was just sitting there, white, glowing white, like it hadn't been sitting there for almost 2 years in the elements, in the weather. So the ranchers, after finding the skull, the ranchers contact the local authorities, the sheriff's department, and the sheriffs come up to the location, and they end up finding a few of his ribs, his pelvis, and a femur bone. They also found his coat with his cell phone in it, sitting not too far from where the bones were located. They never found his pants, socks, or any other shoes, which was weird, because there was no way that Aaron could have hiked miles barefoot in that terrain. The mountains are full of jagged rocks. There is absolutely no way you can make that trip barefoot. Because if you remember, his boots were already found neatly placed by that campfire location that was a couple miles away. Now the coroner report on his death certificate states that he succumbed to hypothermia and exposure to the elements. And sometimes with hypothermia, there's something that's called paradoxical undressing, where people that are in severe stages of hypothermia, they start to feel like they're burning on the inside, and they mistake the cold for heat, and they start to take clothes off, hoping to try and cool off. But this, of course, just makes things worse and speeds up the hypothermic process. Now, about his boots, it is not uncommon for hunters to carry 2 sets of shoes, because when you're trekking through the wilderness, you do need a pair of heavy boots to really protect your feet. But if you come across an animal and you're going to hunt for game and possibly stalk, it has been known that hunters will switch their shoes to make it more quiet. They'll carry a lighter pair of shoes so that when they are stalking the animal, that they don't make as much noise. So this could explain why his boots were found a couple miles away. Maybe he came across an elk and he had his bow and it was bow hunting season. Maybe he didn't have a good shot, so he decided to stalk the elk in his other pair of shoes for a couple miles, which could explain why his body ended up miles away from where his boots were found. However, it doesn't explain why he was within a mile of help that he could physically see with his own eyes, why he didn't go one more extra mile to seek help. Instead, he sat there and drank half an energy drink. This is definitely one of the stranger stories I've done that leaves so many questions unanswered. I've tried to wrap my head around all the weird and anomalous parts of this story, but I have no answers. What do you think happened to Aaron? Let me know in the comments below. The story of Aaron Hedges, the well-regarded hunter went missing in the crazy mountains in 2014, highlights the challenges of search and rescue in remote and rugged terrain. Despite the extensive search efforts, the mystery of what happened to Hedges remains unsolved. One of the key lessons from the Aaron Hedges story is the importance of being prepared when venturing into the backcountry. Hedges reportedly became separated from his hunting companions on purpose and was unable to find his way back to the base camp. It's a reminder that even the most experienced outdoorsmen can find themselves in dangerous situations, and that having the right equipment, knowledge, and survival skills can make all the difference between life or death. Another lesson is the importance of prompt reporting in a missing persons case. In Hedges' case, there was a delay in reporting of his disappearance, which may have hampered search efforts. In general, it's crucial to report a missing person as soon as possible, so that search and rescue teams can begin their efforts before crucial evidence is lost or weather conditions worsen. Finally, the Aaron Hedges story underscores the difficulty of the search and rescue operations in remote and rugged terrain. Even with extensive resources and expertise, it can be incredibly challenging to locate a missing person in these areas. It's a reminder of the need for continued investment in search and rescue capabilities and technology, and for the importance of supporting the dedicated professionals who work tirelessly to find missing people and bring them home to their loved ones. If you've enjoyed this content, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe so I can continue to bring you these mysterious stories.